Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 22, Whitetailed Deer Photography. But before I get started, I wanted to kind of give you an idea of what's going on in my world. I'm getting ready for what I consider to be one of the best times of the year for photography, and that is simply the fall and winter. It's a great time to photograph deer of all species, whitetails, elk. It's a great time to get out there this winter and photograph ducks, various waterfowl, geese. We're moving into a very exciting time for the wildlife photographer. So that's kind of what I'm getting ready for. Getting ready for a trip to the Shenandoah National Park on a scouting trip. I'm getting ready for a trip to Cataloochee, and I'm getting ready for a trip to eastern North Carolina this winter for photographing geese primarily. So it looks like it's going to be a good winter, and I'm really looking forward to it. So what's going on in the news? I started this kind of in the news segment. And this month was Photokina. And one of the biggest things that came out for the month of September, this will actually be out the first week of October, but it was the announcement of the Tamron. The Tamron 150 to 600 DI VC USD G2. That was a mouthful. This is a refresh to the current 150 to 600 that's currently out there. I really, really love, and I mean love, what Tamron and Sigma are doing right now in the wildlife photography space. And I could have picked a lot of different lenses and a lot of different cameras that came out from Photokina, but this one is a winner. In a Tamron press release dated September 2016, the company states, quote, "The new G2 version was developed to provide superior optical performance with today's high-resolution DSLRs and to add improvement to the features, including speed and accuracy of AF and vibration compensation." End quote. So let's talk about the highlights and the specs of this new version 2 lens. It has 3 LD low dispersion lens elements. They completely eliminate axial and transverse chromatic aberration. It has 21 elements in 13 groups. That's glass, folks. That's how many pieces of glass are in there. 21 pieces of glass. It has a faster AF speed. It has better VC performance, down to 4.5 stops, offers 3 modes of optimization for the vibration compensation. VC mode 1 is standard mode, and that strikes a balance between the stability of the viewfinder image and the stability of the effects. It has mode 2, which is used for panning, and mode 3, which prioritizes the stabilization of the captured images. It also has flex zoom lock, which enables locking of the zoom ring at various positions. And this is important when you're carrying the lens so you don't drop it. I shouldn't say you don't drop it, but you don't. When you're carrying the lens, oftentimes you have zoom creep, and that zoom lens can actually extend while you're walking, and you can actually bang that against trees or other obstacles. So the fact that they have the zoom lock now at various lengths is awesome. They have come out specifically with brand new teleconverters for this lens. They're offering a 1.4x and a 2x, and that gives you up to a 1200 millimeter effective focal length. So kudos to Tamron, because they made the grade this month in the news segment. And I'm telling you what, Sigma also came out with a 500 millimeter f4, and I applaud them for that, but the price point on that 500 f4 is extremely high, and I do not recommend it as an affordable lens. I'm sure it's a great lens, but I can't recommend it for affordability. And that's one of the things that this podcast is about. It's about how to make great images with the gear that you have, or in a fairly inexpensive way. And I think Tamron and Tamron's 150 to 600 and the Sigma 150 to 600 have really, really made this possible for the average wildlife photographer. So that's in the news. So in this episode, I wanted to talk specifically about the white-tailed deer. The white-tailed deer, to me, is an absolute beautiful animal. It is an animal that certainly in the eastern United States specifically is a very popular wildlife subject. Most people are familiar with the deer. They're plentiful. They were hunted for their meat for many years and still are. But they're just a unique creature. It just would not be the same in the eastern forests of the United States if the deer, specifically the white-tailed deer, were not present. There's just so many aspects about them that I like. I love their sleek running and jumping capability. I love their coloration. I love the buck's strong build and his the big rack. They're just an amazing animal. The does are beautiful, very feminine in quality. We often refer to a beautiful girl as having doe eyes, because they're that beautiful. So it should come as no surprise that this is one of my projects this year, is to go and photograph the white-tailed deer. Sadly, I've never really photographed the white-tailed deer. I've taken a few random images here and there as I've been out and about, but I have never really sought to photograph the deer. And we're surrounded by them here in the eastern United States. So that is one of my goals this year. I photographed the elk, but not the white-tailed deer. So let's get right into it here. We're not going to have a Know Your Subject segment simply because this is a Know Your Subject episode. So let's start out with some definitions. The white-tailed deer, according to the National Geographic, quote, white-tailed deer, the smallest member of the North American deer family, are found from southern Canada to South America. In the heat of the summer, they typically inhabit fields and meadows, using clumps of broad-leafed and coniferous forests for shade. During the winter, they generally keep to the forests, preferring coniferous stands that provide shelter from the harsh elements, end quote. Why are they called white-tailed deer? And the answer to that is simple. When they run, their tail will flip up in the air, and if you look, it's white underneath. So it has a brown top and a white tail underneath, and that's what you see when you scare them, is that white tail, and so that's why they have the name white-tailed deer. They live about 6 to 14 years. They're about 6 to 7.5 feet in size. They weigh anywhere from 110 pounds to 300 pounds. For the metric equivalent is 50 to 136 kilograms. So let's talk about kind of the behavior of the white-tailed deer. They're herbivores, meaning they eat only vegetation. Their stomachs allow them to digest a varied diet, including leaves, twigs, fruits, nuts, grass, corn, alfalfa, and even lichens, believe it or not. They're known to be primarily nighttime feeders. So in other words, typically during the day, they're either bedded down or they're out and about, but they're not as active. In the early morning and in the early evening hours, they're often out in herds, feeding in fields, foraging in the forests. And so that's why we don't generally see them out in herds. We do see them occasionally during the day, but it's not as frequent. So that's pretty much what a white-tailed deer is. kind of their in general behavior. I think the next question that we need to ask is, when we're going out this fall, is how do we locate them? What signs are we looking for? Well, I think for us and for hunters in general, not just photographers, but hunters also, who are, by the way, an excellent source of information. You may not agree with the fact that they are hunting the animal, but they also are very good woodsmen and can often give you good information. It's all about the rut. And for those that don't understand what that is, the rut for a deer species is simply the time of year or season of mating. During this time, the buck will look for a deer that is in season, or groups of deer, herds of deer, does that are in season, and will try to mate. During this time, which usually is from late October to mid-November, and it continues on, but the peak is usually around mid-November. During this time, the buck is extremely focused, and it's a good time for photographers to photograph them because they don't pay us much attention. They're so busy trying to find a doe that they just don't pay any attention to what's going on. They're driven by large amounts of testosterone, and this is why it's such a great time of the year. So it's a great time for behavior shots. It's a great time for fighting shots and so forth. But one of the key things that I'm doing this year, and it's not just me that recommends this, but I'm hearing this from others, is I am scouting locations. I think scouting is crucial here. And while I'm scouting, I'm going to be looking for several things that will determine what location I will use. The first thing is that you need to consider is that deer, just like any other animal, need water. Water is a key element for the deer. So the first thing, you got to get a topographical map out or use Google Maps, which is what I do. You're going to look for water sources in the location that you're wanting to go to. So in my case, I'm going to scout Shenandoah National Park. So I'm going to look for an area that has water. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for food sources. Sometimes this is more difficult in a national park, but if you are using private property or you know someone that has land or a hunt club or something like that, look for farmers' fields, for example, or apple orchards. Deer love apples and they love corn. So if you can find that, you're doing good. Deer also need protection and shelter. So you may have an open cornfield, and adjacent to that, you may have a stand of trees. That stand of trees offers protection for the animal, both from the elements and from predators. A deer can run very fast. It can dodge trees very quickly and can easily get away from animals such as the coyote. Okay, so once you have an area that you think might hold some deer, the next step is to actually drive to the location, get out of your vehicle, and you're going to start looking for additional signs. The first thing I'm going to look for is an area where the deer have been bedded down for the evening. Well, not for the evening, but during the daylight hours primarily. You're going to look for beds, deer beds. Now, a deer bed is a depression. Usually you'll find them, it could be anywhere, but where I've noticed them the most is in high grass. As you're walking out in this high grass, you'll suddenly come upon this big depression in the high grass, and it looks like something's been laying there. It's much like a dog would lay in his bed at home if you have a pet dog. They'll actually kind of hollow out a little area there, and it protects them from the elements. It provides insulation from heavy wind and rain, and it gives them a warm place, and it gives them a protected place. I can tell you this: I have actually been scared half to death because I was out walking in some of these fields, and they won't even hear you coming. You'll just walk up there, and one will just bolt right in front of you that's laying there in the grass, and neither one of you saw each other, but it'll put the fear of God in you when one of those things jumps up 2 feet in front of you. So that's the first thing you're going to look for. The next thing you're going to look for is game trails. Now, what is a game trail? A game trail is simply a trail that animals make over and over and over again. So it's a place that they travel frequently. For example, a deer will move down the same trails to a water source or to a food source. And it looks, it's about a foot and a half wide trail, usually through some grass, and it will just look like somebody kind of carved out. It's not like a human trail where it's a dirt path. It's more like just looks like someone's been walking through the grass over and over again, and it's just kind of left a little part in the grass. So you're looking for that. And how do you tell if it's a deer trail? The best way is to look for deer tracks. And deer tracks, you can Google it on the internet, but they look like they're very distinctive. They have a split hoof, and so they make two distinct impressions. One foot into the ground makes two distinct impressions from each side of the hoof, and so it's relatively easy to spot that. And once you spot that, then it's used by deer. So now you've got the deer bedded down. You know where they're bedding down. You know where their trails are located. You know where they end and where they start. We're almost there. We've got a couple keys to the puzzle. Now we're talking about going into the rut. And in the rut, you're looking for other specific oddities. And one of those is you're looking for rubs. Now, what is a rub? Rubs are places on the trees where the deer has scraped the bark and some of the tree itself with his antlers. He does this for a variety of reasons. First, he does it to mark his territory. It's the male, or the buck, which is the male species of the deer, will rub his antlers on a tree to show the other male deer that he means business. This is his territory. The other reason that he does it is because deer lose their antlers every year. And as their antlers grow back, they grow a covering over them that we call velvet. And simply, the velvet is something that while it's growing, the velvet supplies the antlers with nourishment, with blood, and helps build those antlers and protect them. When it comes time for the rut, the buck starts to, some of that velvet starts to crack and slip, and pretty soon it starts itching, and then he starts rubbing those antlers on the trees to get all that off. Now, the reason he needs to get all that off is really quite obvious. He needs those things for fighting. That's his weapon. And he will actually clash with other bucks, and their antlers will lock together, and they will fight it out for the next beautiful doe that comes along. So that's the first thing you're going to look for during the rut. So now we've established that there is a buck in the area and that he has marked this area. There are ways, I don't know how accurate this is, but there are ways to kind of tell how big the buck is by his scrapes, supposedly. I've heard that if the tree is 4 inches, then it's probably a 3 to 4 year old buck. If it's 4 to 8 inches, it's probably a 5 to 7 year old buck. So he's probably a pretty big boy. So that's what you're looking for. Now, there is one more thing that you can look for, and that's called a scrape. Now, a scrape is where the buck, again, marks his territory. Now, what he will do is he will paw the ground. He will urinate and he'll paw the ground, and he will urinate on it so that the other bucks in the area know that this is his territory, and they better back off, or there's going to be some fighting. Very interesting behavior. The whole thing is very interesting to me. But once you have all these pieces to the puzzle put together, now you're in a situation where you understand and are educated. You are going into this situation knowing that you are going to find deer. Now, will you find the biggest buck in the state? That's random. It's hard to say. But you put yourself in a good spot. And this is what I'm doing this year. I'm doing the scouting, and when I find a good spot, I'm going to take advantage of it. Now, when you're doing your scouting, don't forget to take your camera with you, because you may actually end up in some good photo ops. Don't just take your binoculars with you. Take your camera. I also recommend that if you're going to get off the beaten path, please use GPS so you don't get lost in the woods. That's not cool, especially in early November, where you could literally freeze to death if you are out wandering around the woods by yourself. If at all possible, take somebody with you, but be very cautious. It's dangerous out there, but enjoy yourself and have fun. I just want to make that caution that there are great apps out there for your phone now that you can use, topographical maps, and actually drop breadcrumbs basically so you can find your way back to your vehicle. Okay, so we've located them. We're going to now go photograph them. Now, I can't speak from experience on whitetail deer photography. I can talk to you a little bit about what I use for elk, because I have some experience there. And largely, I think it's going to translate. What you use for elk is going to translate to what you use for whitetail deer. So what I'm recommending and what I'm going to do, I'm taking my DSLR. I'm actually taking 2 DSLRs with me. I always have one DSLR with me, and I have one for backup inside my vehicle. I like a camera that shoots 8 frames a second, because you never know when you're going to get an action shot where maybe the deer are fighting or the deer are running. So great to have your motor drive turned up to its maximum. So, wow, motor drive. I definitely dated myself with that one. But definitely your frames per second, set that up to 8 frames, 10 frames, whatever. You're going to want a telephoto lens probably in the 200 to 600 millimeter range. This is a situation where you could get away with a 300 millimeter, 200, 300 millimeter lens, and it would not be that unusual. I think Moose Peterson regularly shoots with a 80 to 400, I believe it is, on the Nikon side. So, it just goes to show you that you don't need the 600 millimeter here. Okay, what about a blind? Do you need a blind or hide? Yes and no. If you are going to photograph whitetail deer at a location in a national park, for example, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park or Shenandoah National Park, you're probably not going to need a blind. The deer in these areas are acclimated to humans. As a matter of fact, if you try to get too concealed, you may actually spook them. They're actually used to people wandering around, and they've come to realize that they're not going to get hurt by them. So, no, you don't need a blind in that scenario. However, if you are going to photograph deer on private land or in land that is heavily pressured by hunters, you will need a blind, because deer are very, very good at finding you. You may not be good at finding them, but they can definitely find you. And one of the ways that they do that is with their nose. They have very, very good smell. And if the wind is blowing their direction, hitting you and blowing their direction, they will be alerted to your presence. Now, when when a deer becomes alerted to your presence, they're going to do a couple of things. First, they're going to stop, and they're going to look probably in your direction because they know your smell is coming from that direction. The next thing they're going to do is they may stomp. They may stomp a little bit because that's their first level of alerting. The next thing that they're likely to do is what's called snorting. And if you've never heard this, and it's about 5 o'clock in the morning and it's dark, it will put the fear of God in you. A snort from a deer is a weird sounding thing that I'm not even going to try to do it justice here. You may want to just Google that real quick and listen to it. It is a weird sound. Now, when they start snorting, they're very serious about not wanting you in their presence. And when they do this, they alert every deer within a mile of your location that you are there. And your days of shooting, or your day of shooting, may very well be over at that point. So do keep that in mind. It's better to be quiet and careful. Get into your blind before it gets light, and you should be okay. Obviously, talking loudly is out of the question. Firing off your motor drive, or your camera, I should say, when deer are very close may not be a good idea. You don't want to do anything that's going to make them feel like they need to alert the herd. Okay, so that's a blind. How about camo? Is camo important? Yes and no. Again, if you're in a national park, then no, you don't really need camo. If you are, again, going down the road to your neighborhood farmer and using his property, you may want some camo. Camo helps break up your silhouette, and so it keeps them from getting a visual on you. It's not going to keep them from smelling you, but it'll keep them from seeing you. Honestly, I highly recommend that you start out, and this is what I'm doing, is starting out photographing in a national park. Okay? I think national parks offer us a lot better opportunity and chances of seeing something. I think national parks, the animals are just so acclimated to people that it just makes good sense. You're not going to run into any hunters. You don't have to worry about getting shot by a random bullet. Not that that's probably going to happen, but it could. And so I recommend them. But if you got a farmer friend of yours that doesn't mind you going on his property, that could also be a good opportunity. So that's pretty much, the whitetailed deer. I hope that you'll go out this fall. I hope that you'll at least try to find some whitetails. Try to find some elk. That's another good thing. They also have a rut. It's roughly the same time period. And, they're awesome to photograph. You got bugling calls from them. You've got fights with rival males. Same thing. But I think I kind of, over the years, have kind of gotten into the rut of only doing bird photography. And, it's fun. I love bird photography, don't get me wrong. But there's a whole lot more wildlife out there than the tundra swan and the cardinal. So, let's get out there and try some new stuff. I mean, there's black bear out there. I mean, all kind of different wildlife out there. Okay, so I have an important announcement to make, actually. I have just finished and published the first volume of Reflections of the Creator. And this is a journal, magazine-type book, ebook, that is kind of something I've been wanting to put together for some time. It's 37 pages. It is really kind of an interesting or unusual way that it's put together. It is magazine format, but each story is kind of my take on the adventure, the adventure or the path that it takes each time we go out and and go on a photographic adventure. It kind of goes through how I feel about how this makes me feel, how getting out there in the field makes me feel, how excited and exciting a time it is for me. And then I also interweave tips and tricks as I go, and location information and so forth. So I just want to throw that out there, and I'll have a link in the show notes where you can go out and get your copy. I will give away 5 copies of that to the first 5 people that email me that they want a copy. It's normally $3.99. It's not like it's horribly expensive, but just for this show, the first 5 people that email me at matt.cuda@mattcuda.com will get a free edition. And hopefully this is going to continue. Probably I'll come out with one of these about every other year or every year. It's not going to be a monthly or quarterly kind of thing. But from time to time, I'll come out with one of these journals. So I just wanted to encourage you to take a look at that. And I also just want to thanks again for listening. Go ahead and go out there and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast catcher thing. Just let me know. Let me know how everything's going. Hey, if you get out there and get some great whitetailed deer images, shoot me a link and I'll take a look at them, and I'd be happy to do that. So I wanted to leave you with this quote of inspiration from David Duchemin. Whatever your work, make it art. Do it with all your heart. Fill your canvas with paint. Let it be messy. Make it bold. Make it unapologetically yours. Most of all, make it. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.